We are diving into a tough question about America's war, one most people never think about. Why does the most powerful military on earth rarely fight face to face? Is America cowardly or is it playing a smarter game of global power? Stay with me. America is the most powerful military state the world has ever seen. It has a defense budget larger than most countries combined, carriers that cross oceans, satellites that watch the globe, and nuclear weapons that can destroy nations. Yet in conflict after conflict, the United States often chooses not to stand at the front. Instead, it builds coalitions, fund proxy, launches strike from afar, and sends weapons rather than brigades. Is that because America fear war, or because is it simply too powerful to fight like everyone else? In this documentary, we will trace how America's approach to war evolved from a late entry in World War II to Cold War proxy fights to the long wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and the modern era of drone strikes and arms shipment. We will bet whether this behavior is cowardice or a calculated exercise of power. Let's begin with the scale of America's military power. To understand American choices, first understand its capability. The United States spends hundreds of billions annually on defense. It operates hundreds of military bases in dozens of countries. It fields 11 nuclear power aircraft carriers, floating airfield with thousands of sailors. It has stealth fighter, long-range bomber, nuclear submarines, and a vast intelligence and surveillance apparatus. These skills gives the US strategic overmatch, the ability to project force at most anywhere, but with great power comes responsibility. And after two world wars and nuclear age, Americans and their leaders learned cautions. That caution shaped the second half of the 20th century and continued today. In the late 1930s, the US was deeply isolationist. It preferred commerce and neutrality to spending its sons to fight in Europe. That changed on December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor. The day after the attack, the United States declared war. At even here a lesson emerges. America becomes decisive when attacked, but its industrial and geographical advantage allowed it to win in a way few nations could. By joining the fight at a particular moment, America mobilized enormously and reshaped the post-war order, creating institutions, forging alliances, and assuming global leadership. The cost was massive, hundreds of thousands of American lives, but the payoff was superpower status and the ability to influence the next era. When North Korea invaded the South in 1950, the US led an coalition to repel it. The war escalated quickly and then met China's entry. Heavy fighting produced high casualty and an exhausted stalemate. Ultimately, American policymakers refused to risk a broader war with China or the Soviet Union. The Korean armistice left the peninsula divided, an unfinished conflict and an early example of limited war where the US drew a line to avoid escalation. This was a key moment. You could stop aggression, but you could not risk total war. The calculus of escalation became a core part of US strategy. Now we are talk about the Vietnam, the political and moral cost of prolonged war. So, Vietnam changed American politics forever. What begins as advisors and aid ballooned into 500,000 US troops by the late 1960s. Guerrilla warfare, an unfamiliar terrain, and a silent enemy made victory elusive. The image of combat and returning flag-draped coffins galvanized domestic protest. By the early 1970s, the US public had turned against the war. The government could not sustain the political cost of continued mass calculation. In 1973, the US withdrew, and in 1975, Saigon fell. From Vietnam came the enduring lessons: never enter a prolonged war without a clear objective and a viable exit plan. That lesson directly influenced later doctrines and decisions. Now we will talk about the Cold War proxy wars and the Mujahideen. So, with nuclear deterrence shaping global policy, the US and the Soviet Union rarely reached direct confrontation. Instead, they fought through proxies, arms, money, advisors, and covert operations. One of the most sequential examples was Afghanistan in the 1980s. The Soviet invasion prompted the CIA to fund anti-Soviet Mujahideen through covert programs, supplying weapons, trainings, and money. The Soviet bled, then withdrew. The US had succeeded in weakening its rival without mass American casualties. But the consequences were mixed. The groups the US had funded later splintered, and some cases evolved into extremist movements that would target American interests in the future. Proxy wins can be cheap, but sometimes the bill arrives later. Now we will talk about the Gulf War, technology, coalition, and a new template. So, in 1990, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, the US led a massive coalition to liberate the country. The Gulf War showcased precision weapons, stealth technology, and satellite-guided strikes. In just weeks of air power and a short ground campaign, coalition forces expelled Iraqi troops. Crucially, the campaign minimized the US casualty. The strategy was overwhelming force, used decisively and briefly, then withdrawal. For many American leaders, this became the model: if you intervene, do so with clarity, overwhelming capacity, and an exit strategy. Now we will talk about Afghanistan 2001 to 2021 nations building limits. After 9/11, America went into Afghanistan determined to uproot Al-Qaeda and topple the Taliban. The initial campaign succeeded quickly, but the following decades were a long slog: counter-insurgency, attempts at governance, and a persistent violence. 2 decades, trillions spent, and thousands of lives lost later. The Taliban regained power as the US withdrew in 2021. For many observers, the result felt like a betrayal of the people who fought alongside the West. For policymakers, it was a demonstration of the limit of military power when used for prolonged nation building in a fragmented society. Afghanistan became the textbook case that military victory does not guarantee political stability. So now we are going to talk about the Iraq thing. From 2003 to 2011, regime change and blowback. Okay, so in 2003, invasion of Iraq toppled Saddam Hussein. But removing a dictator exposed deep social and sectarian fractures. The US presence increasingly became a target. Civil war and instability followed. Extremist groups exploited the cause. ISIS emerged from the environment, seizing the territory, and conduct brutal campaigns that required new multinational responses. Iraq's experience reminded leaders that overthrowing regime is straightforward. Securing peace afterward is much harder. The political cost and the humanitarian toll forced the US to confront whether direct intervention without long-term planning was worth the price. Now we are going to talk about the Libya and Syria intervening indirectly. In Libya and Syria, the US and allies intervened in limited ways: air strikes, support to rebels, targeted operations, while deliberately avoiding mass landing. In Libya, NATO's 2011 campaign helped topple Gaddafi but left a vacuum that dissolved into civil war. In Syria, the US funneled weapons to some opposition groups while prioritizing strikes against ISIS and avoiding direct conflict with Russia and Iran. These cases highlight the dilemma of indirect interventions. You can remove a hostile actor or blunt a threat, but you risk creating long-term instability if no viable governance plans exist. So now we are going to talk about the Ukraine, the modern proxy war. Since 2022, Russian aggression in Ukraine has triggered the largest conventional war in Europe since World War II. The US responded with billions in military aid, training, and intelligence support, but stopped short of sending combat troops. That decision reflects clear calculation. Direct US involvement risks a broader war with Russia, a nuclear power. America armed Ukraine heavily, helped it defend and counterattack, but the bulk of fighting and casualty remain Ukrainian. This is the contemporary model, major backing from afar, with the ally itself bearing the brunt of on the ground. Now we are going to talk about the fear versus strategy the world did. So is the US afraid? Short answer, not simply. It would be misleading to call America cowardly. The US has repeatedly used a direct force when it judged the stakes required it. Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq. Instead, the pattern shows that policymakers weighed risk, public opinion, cost, and geopolitical escalation. Nuclear determined coalition politics, domestic tolerance for casualty, and the high economic cost of prolonged wars push the US toward indirect means when possible. That is strategy more than fear, but strategy has moral and practical cost, unstable states, empowered militias, and the long-term blowback. Ultimately, the choice to avoid the front is an expression of privilege, the ability to influence outcome without always paying the deepest price. So that conclude all the thing and so why? So let's start. Does America fear war? No. The better question is what kind of war does America chooses to fight and at what cost to others? Thank you for watching this deep video. If you found this useful, hit like, subscribe and tell us in the comment, do you think America's approach is moral, pragmatic or both? Thank you so much.